Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you live around the world. Today, this is a further slight development in the workshop series for making the alternative method for creating the 3-4-5 triangulation method for positioning dog holes. Bench dog holes, to be more precise and clear. One of the things I wanted to do with this approach, was to make it very versatile and flexible. Flexible in the fact that I can place this assembly that I'm circling here anywhere I flamin' well choose, because quite often we're not permitted that when we use a set method. We are prescribed a position where we need to go, where I want to have a general idea of what I want, and then be able to change my flamin' mind, and hence my invective there. Because this approach will allow me to use the MFT spacings, the MFT top, which is generated off of a 32mm increment, and generally they'll have a 96mm spacings for a lot of their components or spacings. And I don't want that. I don't necessarily not want that, but I'm generally going to be working in 100mm spacings, and that's fine for my sort of work. But I wanted to, if I could, develop up this approach where I can use the nuts and a threaded rod to allow me to do both, or even something different, and not have to get a laser cut piece of steel to achieve it, which isn't particularly cheap. This isn't free either, but it's a lot cheaper than the laser cut version, and as I said, it's flexible. I can alter it as and when the need arises. The main aspect of this is that it is built around a 16mm M16 threaded rod. The thread pitch, the distance between the two threads, is 2mm, or a better way of saying it, one full revolution of a nut will advance it 2mm one way or the other, meaning I can make any spacings for these assemblies in that 2mm increment. However, with a little bit of jiggery pokery, when we set these assemblies up, we may be able to make them in 1mm increments, simply by altering how we set a jig that allows us to assemble them. Now, there is a little bit of a process here. This top nut is a 12mm nut that has been drilled out to 13mm to permit me to thread it with a 14 by 1mm tap or thread on it. That permits these drill guides, which were obtained through another source, another tool, to be inserted because it had the 14 by 1mm thread. Yay! And this was the original idea we see here, that I can glue the 12mm nut to a 16mm nut, which has, that has had the section of it ground down. This permitted it to sit down on the surface flat, as we see evidenced by this model here. This was my main focus, and I spent quite a bit of time doing this, thinking I had to do it because it was the only way I could get it accurate, because of any other way that I was trying to use or utilise was causing me problems. So I spent a lot of time grinding quite accurately but not perfectly, but quite accurately, these nuts. And I say to that, nuts, because I came up with a far, far easier approach. And this is it here. I take my original threaded, my adulterated 12mm nut, and I sit it on an unadulterated 12mm nut, and I glue the darn things together. Yippee. Only thing I have to make sure of is that the two faces are dead flush with each other. Then that permits me to fix the now glued together nuts with super glue, of course, to super glue them to an unadulterated 16mm nut. Yippee! What does that do? Well, that permits me to align or put in place a lock nut, because after all, you don't like loose nuts at all in any form, just saying. But this permits me to lock off this nut assembly so that it can't swing around or move when I am working with it, because that would be a pain and disastrous. So I can now use this lock nut to lock this off into position, and it takes out any minor slop that the nut to threaded rod, the interface of it, has, because there is often a small amount of movement, in the threads of the nut and the threaded rod. Tripping over my mouth this morning. But doing this means I can negate or ignore having to have accurately ground these nuts, which I've already done. Darn it. And these are, as I said, aren't free, so darn it. I can still use them, just that it's going to look a bit odd because they'll have a one face that has been ground off, which is annoying, but I've already got them. So now, all I have to do for this whole assembly, or anything that's difficult, is to to drill out this nut to 13mm and tap it. Well, hey, I've already done that. So I've got my adulterated nut, my unadulterated nut glued together. I haven't done that yet. This is what I'm about to do. Then I can present it up and glue these two together, which means I've got a much bigger surface to glue onto here. It works quite well. I've already tried it. The super glue works very well. Thank you very much. And now this means the nut, the 16mm nut, and the bottom, the peak of it, supports the not inconsiderable weight of the full assembly. So it's not wobbly. And having a jig that permits me, and I'll get onto that again because I've already covered it, but not very well, I would fear. But by having the nut guide assemblies effectively working interdependently in some manner, but independently another in the assembly process, permits me much greater accuracy than I would have originally thought, hoped for. And I'm able to overcome the inaccuracies that I was still seeing. And that because I'm not doing anything with these, I'm not adulterating this, it stays the same. I'm not adulterating this, it's only this single nut that needs some work on. So, yippee. Now, back to this little assembly. I might combine that and then that, make it as a group. See the nice knurling on this? Well, that's actually checker plate. I wanted to see whether I could actually make it look a bit prettier for you, for me actually. And I took the surface, I went into the model, selected this surface only, and then put a checker plate pattern on it, and then yeah, looks better. Anyway, you didn't need to know that. I can delete that because I won't be using it anymore. Ignore the fact that this is and it is a laser cut plate that I had made up for my other method for doing the 3-4-5 triangulation method. I'll still be using this a lot, and I'll still probably use the steel plates or strips that have been laser cut to do most of my dog holes, but this is an alternative which I'm exploring because I think it's got more versatility or flexibility in its use. This, if I just hide that, is the original assembly, but the information is still valid. I would pin this bushing and nut in position. I have in one of these holes below actually it's the thread of one of these bushings, and I've cut the top piece off, and then I've wound the thread part of it into one of these holes. That gives me a locating point for my pin, my locating pin, registration pin, to slide through the bushing and then into that threaded section of it. So it positions this part of the assembly correctly and, importantly in this case, consistently in the same place. It of course makes this nut fall where the nut falls. You can see why I said I don't always explain clearly, but this then makes the nut fall where it falls because it's attached to this nut. A thread is put into this nut. Well, actually, I'll back that up. Will eventually be fixed to this nut. A thread is put into that is locked off this way. So I've got a piece of steel here with a thread in it, a 16mm thread, that we've put into that plate and locked it off with this nut. It has an indicator mark to show its position, and in this case I'm just showing it vertically. I'll get back to that. That means that this nut wound onto the thread will be in exactly the same place every single time. I make up, and then I can glue the two of them together. That's the tricky part, because if I do it properly, how do I get my glue in? So there's that. But being able to locate these components, I can rely on the fact that if I did 20 of them, they all land in the same place on the thread, and when I glue them together, they then are registered to a static point, a single position. They are accurately mated together. It also means that 1/2 revolution of the nut and thread, in this case I'd loosen it, means that I've moved the assembly back this way 1mm, meaning this nut will also pull back 1mm. What that means is I can position this assembly, I'd have to make it differentiate it from the other ones, so that it can now be, it would fulfill the odd number placements along your bar here, along the threaded rod. This is a good thing, because now I can have a standard position and a non-standard, i.e. the 1mm or the uneven number, for my assemblies, making all positions possible. I think that is exceptionally beneficial and distinct from most other approaches. These assemblies can be held until such times you need them, and you don't have to worry about them otherwise. Yippee. Now, if that is not clear, I'll accept, or the understanding for that. There will be more videos coming as and when I do them, of course, and I will perhaps make more clear my thinking on this, because that's kind of necessary. What I'm feeling is, because originally I was going to have this whole alignment, this nut and block here fixed to the plate, but that really doesn't make sense at all. So what I'm thinking is that this assembly needs to be registered to the edge of a plate, because that's what this nut here, this part of the assembly is, it's mated to, and can move in and out. So let's just say, I'm only thinking of this as I talk. It's sitting on a bench like that, and I will explode that. This can be slid along the edge of the plate. In fact, I'll undo that. It can be slid along the edge of the plate with the set point of the nut already achieved, moved it along, and it can mate up to this when I go to glue it. Makes sense to me. It does mean that this needs to be nice and stable, and well, that's to be sorted, but that's for me to worry about, not you. I like this idea a lot, obviously, because I'm making the videos and I think it's got some, it's valid, and I think it's quite doable in the workshop. Very doable, in fact. So there's all of that going for it. And to be fair, you could have a threaded rod like this with these assemblies on it, lock nut them in place, and then you can pop the whole darn thing up in a corner, not to worry about until you need them. Or you can unwind all these components off of the threaded rod, stick them in a wee box somewhere, and not worry about it until you need it. Any which way you can. But I would strongly suggest leaving the series of assemblies on the threaded rod, because there's a lot of threading on one of these rods to get the positions. You've really got to start in the middle and then work your next one out and work outwards from each one. Otherwise, it's a lot of turning. Anyway, that's the thoughts at the moment. I am happy with those ideas, and I can't yet see the problem, because it has removed most of the issues that I had once had. And trust me, I had a lot more issues getting it to this point that were just overcomplicated and unnecessary, as it turns out. Surprise, surprise. Okay, that's it. Quite happy with that, and I better go do something. I've got a lot to do out in the workshop before I even get to this. But we're working towards it once again, because I have my sander almost back to working again. I got it back from the supplier. A little bit concerned about it, but I got it back from the supplier who had to repair it after it breaking, it only being a couple of months old. And now I'm making up a sanding station for it to sit on, and well, that's what I'm doing. Okay, that's it. Waffling again, so that's always an indication of this is the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one now. Bye.